My husband insisted I attend the corporate gala. In 25 years of marriage, he'd never once wanted me by his side at any business function. When he said I had to come, I knew something was terribly wrong. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far my story has reached. It was a Tuesday morning in October when Morgan Sheffield changed the rules of our marriage. I was standing at the kitchen counter pouring his coffee into the same porcelain cup I'd used for 25 years. My hands moved automatically through the routine. 2 sugars, a splash of cream. No more, no less. The morning sun streamed through our kitchen windows, catching the marble countertops Morgan had insisted on installing 3 years ago. Everything in our Denver home was expensive. Everything looked perfect from the outside. Just like our marriage. "You're coming with me Saturday night," Morgan announced without looking up from his Wall Street Journal. I paused the coffee pot hovering over his cup. "Coming where? The Morrison Industries Gala, downtown at the Grand Hyatt." He finally glanced at me, his gray eyes sharp behind his reading glasses. "The new CEO will be there. I need to make the right impression." My stomach tightened. Morgan was 69 years old and had spent the last decade desperately trying to maintain his position in Denver's business community. His real estate development company was hemorrhaging money, though he'd never admitted out loud. I knew the truth. I heard the phone calls late at night, the worried conversations about loans and investors pulling out, the barely concealed panic when another deal fell through. "Are you sure you want me there?" I asked carefully. "I don't really have anything appropriate to wear." Morgan's jaw tightened. It was the expression he got when I'd said something that embarrassed him. "Find something, Camila. Buy something if you have to." He pulled out his wallet and counted out 3 $50 bills. "Just don't embarrass me. Don't embarrass me." Those 3 words had been the soundtrack of our marriage for over 2 decades. Don't embarrass me by talking too much at dinner parties. Don't embarrass me by mentioning your family background. Don't embarrass me by wearing the wrong clothes or saying the wrong things or existing too loudly in spaces where I wasn't wanted. I took the money feeling the familiar weight of it in my palm. $150 to transform myself into someone worthy of standing beside Morgan Sheffield at a business function. "Thank you," I said quietly. He'd already returned to his newspaper. That afternoon, I drove to the Goodwill on South Broadway. My 2008 Honda Civic made a concerning rattling sound as I pulled into the parking lot. Morgan drove a leased BMW. I drove a car with 200,000 miles and a check engine light that had been on for 3 months. The thrift store smelled like detergent and old fabric. I wandered through the racks of evening wear, my fingers trailing over polyester and silk, searching for something that might pass for elegant at a high society gala. After 25 years, I'd become an expert at making something from nothing. Morgan gave me $300 a month for personal expenses. Everything had to come from that allowance. My clothes, my toiletries, the small gifts I bought for his business associates during the holidays. Even the tampons I'd needed until 3 years ago came from that budget. $300 a month to exist. Meanwhile, Morgan spent $400 on a single dinner at his favorite steakhouse. I found the dress on a clearance rack in the back corner. Emerald green silk with long sleeves and a modest neckline. The tag said it had originally come from Nordstrom. Someone had donated it with the original price tag still attached, $495. The Goodwill price was $65. My hands trembled slightly as I held the dress up to the fluorescent lights. The emerald color reminded me of something I'd tried very hard to forget. A ring I'd worn when I was 22 years old. A ring I still kept hidden in the back of my jewelry box, though I had no right to keep it. "That's a beautiful color," said the woman behind me. I turned to find an elderly black woman with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. She was holding a navy blue cardigan, examining it carefully. "Thank you," I managed. "I'm not sure it's appropriate for what for you." She smiled. "Sweetheart, that color makes your eyes sparkle. Someone's going to look at you and remember why they fell in love with you in the first place." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. No one had fallen in love with me. Morgan had married me because I was safe, because I was broken and grateful and wouldn't ask too many questions about his business dealings or his late nights at the office. And before Morgan, there had been someone who loved me. Someone I'd walked away from 30 years ago, believing I was protecting him from a future of struggle and disappointment. I bought the emerald dress for $65. I had $85 left from Morgan's money, which meant I could afford a pair of neutral heels from the shoe section. As I drove home, I touched the small silver locket at my throat. I'd worn it every day for 30 years, hidden beneath my clothes where no one could see it. Inside was a photograph so small you could barely make out the faces. 2 college students standing beside a lake in Colorado. Both of them young and stupid and desperately in love. I'd been Camilla Anderson then, 22 years old with a partial scholarship and 3 jobs and dreams of becoming a high school English teacher. He'd been Ethan Blackwood, business major, brilliant and ambitious kind, in a way that surprised me every single day. We'd planned to get married after graduation. We'd planned our entire future together. Then his father had threatened to destroy my scholarship, my career, everything I'd worked for, if I didn't walk away. And I was pregnant with Ethan's child, though I'd never told him before I left. I lost the baby 3 weeks after I broke his heart. 6 months later, I married Morgan Sheffield because I was tired of grieving alone, because I thought safety was more important than love, because at 23 years old, I believed my chance at happiness had already passed. Now I was 57 years old, driving home in a car that was falling apart, holding a dress the color of emeralds, and memories I couldn't quite bury. Saturday arrived faster than I wanted. I spent the morning cleaning our 4-bedroom house, even though Morgan had hired a cleaning service that came twice a week. But I needed something to do with my hands. Some way to quiet the anxiety that had been building in my chest all week. Why did Morgan want me at this gala? In 25 years, he'd made it abundantly clear that I was an embarrassment to his professional image. I was too plain, too poorly educated, too working class for his business world. I'd met Morgan through my father, who'd done construction work on one of Morgan's early development projects. Morgan had been 44 years old, recently divorced, looking for a wife who wouldn't make demands or cause problems. I'd been 23, grieving a lost love and a lost child, desperate for someone to make me feel safe again. We weren't a love match. We were a transaction. He got a quiet, compliant wife who wouldn't question his business practices or his late nights. I got financial security and a place to hide from the pain of my past. For 25 years, that transaction had held. But now, standing in front of my bathroom mirror at 5 o'clock on Saturday evening, I wondered if the terms were about to change. I put on the emerald dress carefully. It fit perfectly, hugging my waist and falling to just below my knees. The silk felt expensive against my skin. I did my makeup simply. A little foundation to cover the age spots. Some mascara. A neutral lipstick that wouldn't draw attention. My hair had gone silver over the past decade, a transition Morgan had complained about constantly. "Can't you dye it?" he'd asked more than once. "You're making me look old." But I'd refused. The silver felt earned, honest. I pulled my hair back in a low chignon the way Morgan preferred. Nothing too dramatic, nothing that would draw attention. Then I made a decision that would change everything. I unclasped the silver locket from around my neck, the one I'd worn hidden beneath my clothes for 30 years, and fastened it so it was visible against the emerald silk. It was a small act of rebellion, a tiny piece of my real self on display. Morgan knocked on the bathroom door. "Are you ready? We need to leave in 10 minutes. "Almost," I called back. I looked at myself in the mirror one last time. A 57-year-old woman in a second-hand dress, wearing a locket that contained a photograph of the only man who'd ever really loved her. "Whatever happens tonight," I whispered to my reflection, "at least you'll know you were brave enough to wear your heart where people could see it." I opened the bathroom door. Morgan stood in the hallway, impeccable in his black tuxedo. His silver hair was slicked back with expensive gel. He wore his father's gold Rolex, the one that reminded everyone he came from money, even if that money was long gone. He looked me up and down, his expression critical. "The dress is acceptable," he said finally. "But you're wearing that necklace." "It was my mother's," I lied. My mother had never owned anything this delicate. Morgan frowned, but didn't push the issue. "Fine, let's go. And remember, stay near the bar area in the back. Don't wander. Don't engage in conversations unless someone speaks to you directly. And for God's sake, don't mention anything personal." "I understand." The drive to the Grand Hyatt was silent except for the classical music Morgan preferred. Mozart, Piano Concerto No. 22-1. I stared out the window at the Denver skyline, watching the mountains fade into twilight shadows in the distance. Those mountains had been there for millions of years. They'd witnessed countless human dramas unfold beneath their peaks. Tonight they would witness mine. The Grand Hyatt ballroom was exactly what I expected. Crystal chandeliers hung from 20-foot ceilings, casting warm light over white-clothed tables and elaborate flower arrangements. The air smelled like expensive perfume and fresh lilies. Everywhere I looked, women wore gowns that cost more than my car. I felt like an imposter in my $65 dress. "Stay here," Morgan commanded, pointing to a spot near the bar where decorative plants created a small alcove. "I need to network. Don't wander off." He disappeared into the crowd before I could respond. I stood in my assigned corner holding a glass of water watching Denver's elite celebrate the acquisition of Morrison Industries by some mysterious new CEO. The people around me laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. They compared vacation homes in Aspen and summer houses in the Hamptons. They wore their wealth like armor, protecting them from the reality most people lived. I'd never fit into this world. Not in 25 years of trying. A waiter passed by with a tray of champagne. I shook my head. I didn't drink alcohol. Morgan said it made me sloppy and emotional. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. I watched Morgan across the room, his face red with exertion as he gestured wildly to a group of men in expensive suits. He was trying too hard. They could sense his desperation the way sharks smell blood in water. Then the energy in the room changed. Conversations quieted. Heads turned toward the main entrance. Even the waiters paused in their circuits around the ballroom. I craned my neck to see what had caused the shift. A tall man had entered the ballroom. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal tuxedo that probably cost more than my car. His dark hair was touched with silver at the temples. He moved with the quiet confidence that only comes from real power, not the desperate imitation of it that Morgan performed. Even from across the crowded ballroom, there was something familiar about the way he carried himself. The way he tilted his head slightly when someone spoke to him. The way he held his hands relaxed but purposeful. "That's him," someone whispered nearby. "That's Ethan Blackwood, the new CEO." The glass of water slipped from my hand. It shattered on the marble floor, water spreading across the white tiles. Several people turned to look at me. I felt my face flush hot with embarrassment. "Sorry," I mumbled, kneeling to pick up the broken glass. "I'm so sorry." A waiter appeared with a towel. "Please, ma'am, let me—" But I couldn't hear him anymore, because across that ballroom, Ethan Blackwood had turned at the sound of breaking glass, and his eyes, those dark eyes I'd known since I was 21 years old, locked directly onto mine. I watched his face go completely white. His lips parted in shock. For one eternal moment, we stared at each other across 300 people and 30 years of separation. Then he was moving, walking straight toward me as if the 100 other people in that ballroom didn't exist. I stood up slowly, pieces of broken glass still in my hands. My heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. This couldn't be happening. Ethan Blackwood couldn't be the new CEO of Morrison Industries. The universe couldn't be this cruel or this kind. Morgan spotted Ethan's trajectory and immediately changed course, intercepting him halfway across the ballroom. "Mr. Blackwood," Morgan's voice carried across the space. "Morgan Sheffield Development. Such an honor to finally meet." Ethan's gaze never left my face. "Excuse me," he said to Morgan, his voice deeper than I remembered, but unmistakably his. "I need to speak with someone." He walked past Morgan as if he were invisible. The crowd parted for him automatically, and then he was standing in front of me, close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive and sophisticated, nothing like the cheap aftershave he'd worn in college. "Camilla," he said, and my name on his lips after 30 years made my knees weak. "Ethan," I whispered back. Without hesitation, he took both my hands in his. His hands were warm and steady. On his left hand, I noticed his ring finger was bare. The broken glass I'd been holding fell to the floor. "I've been looking for you for 30 years, Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. His dark eyes were bright with unshed tears. When he spoke again, his words carried across the suddenly silent ballroom. "I never stopped loving you." Behind him, I heard Morgan's champagne glass hit the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot. 300 people stood frozen, watching the CEO of Blackwood Industries hold the hands of Morgan Sheffield's plain, invisible wife. And I realized that after 25 years of being told to stay in the background, to not draw attention, to not embarrass anyone, I was about to become the most talked about woman in Denver. The silence in the ballroom lasted maybe 3 seconds. It felt like an eternity. Morgan recovered first, his businessman's instincts kicking in despite his obvious shock. "Mr. Blackwood," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "I don't know what you think. I think—" Ethan interrupted, still looking at me, "that I need to speak with Camilla privately." "She's my wife," Morgan said, and I heard something I'd never heard in his voice before. Fear. For the first time in 25 years, Morgan Sheffield was afraid of losing me. Not because he loved me, but because losing me in front of Denver's business elite would be the final proof that he'd lost control of everything. "Then I'll wait for her call." Ethan reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. Expensive cardstock with silver embossing. He turned it over and wrote something on the back with a fountain pen he pulled from his inside pocket. Then he handed it to me. Our fingers brushed. The contact sent electricity through my entire body, a reminder of what it felt like to be touched with love instead of ownership. "Please," Ethan said softly, speaking only to me now. "Call me. We need to talk about everything." I looked down at the card. On the back in handwriting I still recognized after 3 decades he'd written his personal cell phone number. My voice cracked. "I don't know if—" "I'll be waiting," he said, "however long it takes." Then he did something that made the crowd gasp. He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it gently, the same way he used to when we were students, and he'd walk me back to my dorm after long nights in the library. "It's good to see you again, Camilla Anderson," he said, using my maiden name deliberately. "You're still the most beautiful woman in any room." Morgan grabbed my arm, hard enough that I knew there would be bruises tomorrow. "We're leaving," he announced to no one in particular. "Now." He dragged me through the ballroom, past the staring faces and whispered speculations. I clutched Ethan's business card in my free hand, the sharp edges pressing into my palm like a lifeline. Behind us, I heard someone say, "Did you see his face?" He looked at her like she was the only person in the world. Another voice. "Who is she? I've never seen her before." A third. "That's Morgan Sheffield's wife. I had no idea she was so—" But I didn't hear the rest because Morgan had shoved me into the coat check area and was hissing in my ear. "What the hell was that? How do you know Ethan Blackwood?" "He's someone from a long time ago," I said quietly. "Before I met you." "Before, Morgan's grip on my arm tightened. "That wasn't before. That was—" He struggled for words. "That man looked at you like he owns you." "No," I said, surprising myself with my own firmness. "He looked at me like he loves me. There's a difference. You wouldn't know because you've never looked at me that way." Morgan's face went white, then red. "You're my wife, Camilla. Mine. Whatever you think you had with that man is none of your business," I finished. "What I had before our marriage belongs to me, not you." For the first time in 25 years, I'd drawn a boundary. Morgan stared at me like he didn't recognize me. Maybe he didn't. Maybe I didn't recognize myself either. The valet brought Morgan's BMW around. The drive home was silent, but it wasn't the comfortable silence I'd grown accustomed to over 2 decades of marriage. This was the silence before a storm. Morgan locked himself in his study as soon as we got home. I could hear him on the phone, his voice rising and falling in angry explanation, calling his business partners his lawyer, maybe even his therapist, telling them about the humiliation he'd suffered at the hands of the new CEO. I went to our bedroom and carefully hung the emerald dress in the closet. It looked out of place among my practical beige and navy clothes. Then I sat on the edge of our bed, king-sized with expensive sheets Morgan had insisted on, and looked at Ethan's business card. Ethan Blackwood, Chief Executive Officer, Blackwood Industries. And on the back, in his distinctive handwriting, a phone number and 3 words. "Please call me." I pulled out the small wooden jewelry box I kept hidden in the back of my closet beneath winter sweaters Morgan never noticed. Inside was the only piece of my past life I'd been allowed to keep. Ethan's grandmother's emerald ring. I'd been wearing it for exactly 3 months when his father had summoned me to his office downtown. When Charles Blackwood had laid out exactly how he would destroy my future if I didn't walk away from his son. I'd tried to return the ring to Ethan when I broke up with him. I'd placed it on the table between us in that coffee shop near campus, the small click of metal against wood sounding like the death of everything we'd planned together. But later that night I'd found it in my coat pocket. Ethan must have slipped it there when I wasn't looking. One last gift. One last piece of the future we'd lost. I'd kept it for 30 years. Every time I'd tried to throw it away or mail it back to him, something stopped me. The ring was all I had left of the person I'd been before grief and fear had reshaped me into someone else entirely. Now I held the ring up to the lamplight, watching the emerald catch the glow. The same green as the dress I'd worn tonight. The same green as Ethan's eyes when he looked at me in the ballroom and said he'd never stopped loving me. 30 years. He'd been looking for me for 30 years, and I'd been right here in Denver. Same city, same name, same life. How is that possible? I thought about calling him right then, picking up my phone and dialing the number he'd written on that business card. But it was past midnight, and I was still married to Morgan Sheffield, and I had no idea what calling Ethan would mean for the fragile structure of the life I'd built. So instead, I did what I'd done every night for the past 3 decades. I put the emerald ring back in its box. I hid the box beneath the winter sweaters. I told myself that tomorrow I would be brave enough to make a different choice. Tomorrow I would call Ethan Blackwood and find out what had happened to the future we'd planned when we were 22 years old and believed that love was stronger than any obstacle. Tomorrow, but not tonight. Tonight I was still Camilla Sheffield, 57 years old, married to a man who saw me as a possession, living in a house that had never felt like home. Tonight I was still playing it safe. I touched the locket at my throat, the one I'd worn visible for the first time in 30 years, and whispered to the photograph inside, "I'm sorry I wasn't brave enough to fight for us, but maybe it's not too late to find out who I could have been if I had." Down the hall I heard Morgan's study door slam open, heavy footsteps approaching our bedroom. I quickly put the jewelry box away and turned off the lamp, pretending to be asleep. The bedroom door opened. Morgan stood in the doorway, backlit by the hallway light. "Camilla," he said, "I know you're awake." I didn't respond. "Tomorrow we need to talk about expectations, about boundaries, about what's acceptable behavior for my wife." Still, I said nothing. After a long moment, he closed the door. I lay in the darkness, Ethan's business card hidden beneath my pillow, and allowed myself to imagine just for a moment what my life might look like if I was brave enough to choose love over safety. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Ethan Blackwood was back in my life after 30 years of silence. The man I'd loved with every fiber of my being when I was 22 years old. The man whose child I'd carried for 3 months before losing everything. At 3 in the morning, I gave up pretending to sleep. I slipped out of bed quietly. Morgan was snoring in his study. He'd never come back to our bedroom. I wrapped my robe around myself and went downstairs to the kitchen. The house was dark and silent, expensive and empty. I made tea I didn't want just to have something to do with my hands. The kettle's whistle seemed too loud in the pre-dawn quiet. Ethan's business card sat on the kitchen counter where I'd placed it. White cardstock with silver lettering. His personal number on the back. "Please call me." My phone was right there. I could call him right now. 3:30 in the morning was a perfectly acceptable time to call the man who'd declared his love for you in front of 300 people. Right? I laughed, but it came out sounding broken. Who was I kidding? I was 57 years old. I'd been married to Morgan for 25 years. I had no money of my own, no job, nowhere to go if I left. And Ethan Blackwood was a billionaire CEO who'd probably built up some romanticized memory of who I'd been at 22. Young, hopeful, full of dreams. I wasn't that girl anymore. That girl had died the day I walked into Charles Blackwood's office and realized that love wasn't enough to protect the people you cared about. I sipped my tea and watched the Denver skyline through our kitchen windows. The mountains were just beginning to emerge from the darkness, their peaks touched with the first hint of dawn. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text message. At 3:47 a.m., my hands shook as I picked it up. "Unknown number, I know it's late. Or early. I couldn't sleep. I keep thinking about seeing you tonight. About how you're still the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Please call me when you're ready. I'll wait as long as it takes." He was awake too. Somewhere in Denver, Ethan Blackwood was lying awake at 3:47 in the morning, thinking about me. I read the message 3 times. Then I did something I'd told myself I wouldn't do. I typed back I couldn't sleep either. The response came within seconds. "Ethan, can I call you me? Not yet. Morgan is in the house. Ethan, tomorrow then. Coffee somewhere we can talk without interruption." Me, I don't know if this is wise. Ethan wisdom has nothing to do with it. Some things are just necessary. I stared at those words for a long time. Some things are just necessary. Me Blue Moon Cafe, 16th Street, 10 a.m. Ethan, I'll be there. I set my phone down and realized I was crying. Not the quiet, swallowed tears I'd learned to cry during my marriage to Morgan. These were the messy, gulping sobs of someone who'd been holding their breath for 30 years and finally remembered how to exhale. I spent the next morning in a fog of anxiety and anticipation. Morgan emerged from his study at 8 o'clock, his eyes bloodshot, his expensive suit rumpled from sleeping in his desk chair. "We need to discuss last night," he said without preamble. "I'm going out for coffee," I replied, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "We can talk when I get back." "Coffee where?" "Just out. I need some air." Morgan's eyes narrowed. "You're meeting him." I didn't deny it. "I'm meeting someone from my past, someone I need closure with." "Closure?" Morgan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Is that what you're calling it? What would you like me to call it? Betrayal? Adultery? A pathetic attempt to recapture your youth with a man who—" "Stop," I said quietly. "Just stop." Morgan took a step toward me. "I've given you everything, Camilla. This house, security, a life most women would kill for, and you're throwing it away for some fantasy from 3 decades ago." "You've given me a cage," I said. "A beautiful, expensive cage, but it's still a cage." His face went white, then red. "Get out." "What? Get out of my house. Go to your coffee date. But when you come back, we're going to have a very serious conversation about the future of this marriage." I grabbed my purse and walked out the door. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely find my car keys. The Blue Moon Cafe was tucked between a bookstore and a vintage clothing shop on 16th Street. I'd discovered it 5 years ago during one of my rare solo outings. It was the kind of place where artists and students nursed single cups of coffee for hours, working on novels or studying for exams. It was one of the few places in Denver where I felt like I could breathe. I arrived 15 minutes early and chose a table in the back corner. The cafe smelled like roasted coffee beans and cinnamon pastries. Jazz music played softly from speakers mounted on exposed brick walls. I ordered a latte I didn't want and waited. What would I even say to him? "Hi, Ethan, sorry I broke your heart 30 years ago and never explained why. Also, I was pregnant with your child, but I lost the baby and married someone else 6 months later. How have you been?" My stomach churned. This was a mistake. I should leave. The door opened. Ethan Blackwood walked into the Blue Moon Cafe at exactly 10 o'clock. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today. Just dark jeans, a gray cashmere sweater, and a leather jacket that probably cost more than my car. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, as if he'd run his hands through it repeatedly. He looked more like the college student I'd fallen in love with than the billionaire CEO from last night. Our eyes met across the crowded cafe. He smiled, that same crooked smile that had made me fall in love with him when I was 21 years old and thought I understood what love meant. I'd had no idea. "Hi," he said, sliding into the chair across from me. "Hi," I whispered back. For a moment, we just looked at each other. 30 years of separation. 30 years of different lives, different choices, different versions of ourselves. But his eyes were the same, dark and intense and completely focused on me, as if I were the only person in the world worth seeing. "You look beautiful," he said. I laughed. It came out watery. "Ethan, I'm 57 years old. I have gray hair and wrinkles and you're still the most beautiful woman I've ever seen." He reached across the table and took my hand. "Do you have any idea how many times I've imagined this moment? Ethan, let me say this first. Please." His thumb traced circles on the back of my hand, and I remembered how he used to do that when we studied together in the library, when the world felt overwhelming and his touch was the only thing that made sense. "I've thought about you every single day for 30 years, he said quietly. "Every morning when I wake up, every night before I sleep. I've wondered where you were, what you were doing, if you were happy, if you ever thought about me." Tears spilled down my cheeks. I never stopped thinking about you. "Then why did you leave?" The question I'd been dreading for 3 decades. I took a deep breath. "Because your father threatened to destroy both our futures if I didn't." Ethan went very still. "What now?" So I told him everything. I told him about the meeting in Charles Blackwood's office 3 days after we'd gotten engaged, about the threats to my scholarship, my career, everything I'd worked for, about how his father had promised to destroy Ethan's future too, make sure every door closed, every opportunity vanished. I told him about being pregnant, about losing the baby 3 weeks after I walked away, about marrying Morgan because I was 23 and broken and thought I didn't deserve better. Ethan listened without interrupting. His face grew paler with each revelation. When I finished, he sat in stunned silence for a long moment. "My father threatened you," he said finally, his voice deadly quiet. "You were pregnant with my child, and you never told me." I was 22 and terrified. I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Your father convinced me that loving you would destroy us both, that we'd end up resenting each other when the money ran out and the dreams died." Jesus Christ, Camilla. Ethan ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I remembered from when he was overwhelmed or frustrated. "Why didn't you tell me? Why didn't you come to me with this? Because I thought I was protecting you." "Protecting me?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You protected me by breaking my heart and disappearing from my life. You protected me by letting me believe for 30 years that I wasn't good enough to keep you." The pain in his voice was unbearable. I reached across the table and took his hand. "Ethan, I'm so sorry. I thought I was doing the right thing." He turned his hand palm up, capturing my fingers in his. "My father died 5 years ago," he said quietly. "I spent the last 15 years of his life trying to earn his approval, trying to prove I could build something without his help. I never knew about the threats, never knew what he did to you. It doesn't matter now. It matters to me," Ethan said firmly. "It matters because I need you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not when you left. Not when you married Morgan Sheffield. Not when I married Catherine because my parents insisted I needed a suitable wife for appearances." My heart clenched. "You got married. Divorced 3 years ago. Amicable, no children, no real love lost on either side." He smiled sadly. "We both knew we'd married for the wrong reasons. She wanted access to my family's social circle. I wanted to stop my parents from asking when I was going to settle down and forget about you. You never forgot." "Never." His hand tightened around mine. "I searched for you, Camilla, for years. I hired investigators, followed leads that went nowhere. I thought you'd changed your name, moved out of state, wanted nothing to do with me. Every trail went cold. Something cold settled in my stomach." "What do you mean every trail went cold?" "Private investigators, 5 different firms over the course of 20 years. They all reported back that you'd essentially vanished. No forwarding address, no employment records in Colorado, no marriage license, nothing." "But I never left Denver," I said slowly. "I've been here the whole time. My marriage license is public record. I worked at the public library for 10 years before Morgan made me quit." Ethan's expression darkened. "Then someone was paying my investigators to report false information." We stared at each other across the small cafe table as the implications sank in. "Morgan," I whispered. "Tell me about your husband," Ethan said, his voice carefully controlled. "How did you meet him?" So I told him. About my father doing construction work on one of Morgan's projects. About Morgan being 12 years older, recently divorced, looking for a quiet wife who wouldn't make demands. About marrying him 6 months after I lost Ethan's baby because I was exhausted from grieving alone. "He knew," I said, the realization hitting me like cold water. "Morgan must have known you were looking for me. He must have—" My phone buzzed on the table. A text from Morgan. "Where are you? Come home now." Another buzz. "I know you're with him. This is your last warning, Camilla." Ethan saw the messages. His jaw tightened. "Has he ever hurt you?" "Not physically," I said. "But he controls everything. My money, my clothes, where I go, who I see. I haven't had a real friend in 15 years. He convinced me to quit my job at the library because he said working was embarrassing for a woman in my position." "That's abuse, Camilla." "I know." The admission felt like defeat and liberation at the same time. "I've known for a long time, but I have nowhere to go. No money of my own. He gives me $300 a month for personal expenses. Everything else is in his name." Ethan pulled out his wallet and retrieved another business card. This one had different information on it. "This is my personal attorney," he said. "Call her tomorrow. Tell her I sent you. She specializes in divorce cases involving financial abuse." "Ethan, I can't—" "Yes, you can." He reached across the table and cupped my face in his hands. The gesture was so familiar it made my chest ache. Listen to me. I found you again after 30 years. I'm not losing you to another man who doesn't know what he has. I don't care how long it takes or how complicated it gets. We're going to fix this. What if it's too late? I whispered. What if too much time has passed? We're not the same people we were at 22. You're right, Ethan said. We're not the same people. We're better, stronger. We know what we lost and what it cost us. That makes what we have now even more valuable. He leaned across the table and kissed me. It was gentle and careful and tasted like coffee and 30 years of waiting. When we broke apart, I was crying again. I have a job offer for you, Ethan said, still holding my face in his hands. Director of Community Relations at Blackwood Industries. We're launching a literacy program partnership with Denver Public Schools. You'd be perfect for it. Ethan? $125,000 a year. Full benefits. Your own office. Complete autonomy over your department. He smiled. Financial independence, Camilla. The chance to build a life that belongs to you, not to Morgan Sheffield. My phone buzzed again. Morgan calling this time. I looked at Ethan's face, then at my phone, then back at Ethan. I need time to think, I said. Take all the time you need. He pulled out a pen and wrote another number on the back of his attorney's card. This is my personal cell, not the business line. Call me day or night. I'll answer. We sat together for another hour drinking coffee that had gone cold, talking about everything and nothing. He told me about building Blackwood Industries without his father's help, about the years of struggle, the near bankruptcy, the slow climb to success. I told him about the library job I'd loved, about the reading programs I'd wanted to start before Morgan made me quit, about the small dreams I'd buried under 25 years of trying to be the wife Morgan wanted. When we finally stood to leave, Ethan pulled me into his arms. He smelled like expensive cologne and coffee and possibility. Whatever you decide, he whispered against my hair, know that I'll be here. I waited 30 years. I can wait longer if I have to. But I heard what he didn't say. Please don't make me wait. I drove home in a daze, my lips still tingling from Ethan's kiss, my mind racing with possibilities I'd never dared to imagine. Financial independence, a job I'd actually care about, the chance to use my education for something meaningful instead of playing the role of Morgan Sheffield's quiet, invisible wife, the chance to choose love instead of safety. But when I pulled into our driveway, I saw Morgan's BMW parked at an angle blocking the garage. The front door was standing open. Something was very wrong. I grabbed my purse and hurried inside. Morgan. He was in the kitchen, standing by the marble counter. A bottle of scotch sat open beside him. It was barely noon. 3 hours, he said without turning around. You were gone for 3 hours. I told you I was getting coffee. Coffee, he laughed. The sound was ugly. You were getting coffee with Ethan Blackwood for 3 hours. What exactly were you discussing, Camilla? The past. Things that happened before I met you. Morgan spun around. His face was flushed, his eyes slightly unfocused from the alcohol. Don't lie to me, he said. I know what this is about. You think you're in love. 57 years old and acting like a teenager with your first crush. That's not... It's pathetic, Camilla. Truly pathetic. He took a step toward me. Do you really think Ethan Blackwood wants you? You're not the 22-year-old college girl he remembers. You're an old woman with gray hair and wrinkles. When he realizes that he'll disappear faster than... Stop, I said quietly. Why should I? Someone needs to tell you the truth. You're embarrassing yourself. Embarrassing me. That scene at the gala. Do you have any idea how many calls I've gotten? How many people are talking about my wife and the CEO who publicly declared his love for her? Maybe they're talking about how sad it is that a woman stayed in a loveless marriage for 25 years because she thought she didn't deserve better. Morgan's face went white, then red. You want to know about sad? He said, his voice low and dangerous. Let me tell you something that will change your perspective on your precious reunion. He pulled out his phone, scrolled through something, then turned the screen toward me. It was an email, dated 15 years ago, from a private investigation firm to Morgan Sheffield. The subject line read, R.E. Ethan Blackwood Inquiries, Updated Report. My blood went cold. What is this? Read it, Morgan said. I took the phone with shaking hands. The email detailed how Ethan Blackwood had hired yet another private investigator to search for Camila Anderson, last known address Colorado Springs, believed to have relocated 1995 to 1996. The investigator reported finding no trace of anyone by that name. Morgan's response, forwarded from his personal email: maintain current narrative, standard fee plus bonus for continued discretion. I looked up at my husband with dawning horror. You knew, I whispered. You knew he was looking for me. Of course I knew. Morgan poured himself another scotch. The first inquiry came about 6 months after we got married. Some private detective calling around asking questions about you. It didn't take much to figure out who was behind it. And you paid them to lie. I protected our marriage, Morgan said coldly. I protected you from making a terrible mistake. You destroyed 30 years of our lives. My voice rose, years of suppressed anger finally breaking through. You let him search for me, let him believe I'd disappeared, let him waste his time and money on a fantasy, Morgan interrupted. Yes, I did, because I knew what would happen if he found you. I knew you'd leave me, just like you're planning to leave now. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped his phone. How many? I asked. How many investigators did you pay off? 7 over the years, maybe 8. He shrugged as if we were discussing something trivial. It wasn't difficult. Money talks, Camila. And Blackwood's investigators weren't particularly loyal to him. They were happy to take my bribes and report false leads. I thought about Ethan telling me he'd searched for years, about the pain in his voice when he said every trail went cold, about 30 years we could have had together if Morgan hadn't systematically destroyed every chance of us finding each other. You're a monster, I said quietly. I'm a businessman, Morgan corrected. I saw something valuable and I protected my investment. You were young, beautiful, damaged enough to be grateful for stability. The perfect wife for someone like me. I was never your wife. I was your possession. And what's the difference? Morgan drained his scotch. You think Ethan Blackwood sees you any differently? You're a fantasy to him, Camila, the girl who got away. When he realizes you're just an ordinary middle-aged woman with no money, no career, no social connections, he'll lose interest fast enough. You're wrong. Let me ask you something. He leaned against the counter, studying me. When Ethan realizes that you come with baggage, a messy divorce, probably years of therapy to undo the damage from our marriage financial dependence, do you really think he'll stick around? The words hit their mark because they echoed my own fears. But then I remembered Ethan's hands cupping my face, his voice saying we're going to fix this, the way he'd kissed me like I was precious and worth fighting for. At least he gave me a choice, I said. At least he offered me the chance to decide for myself what I wanted instead of manipulating me into compliance. I pulled Ethan's attorney's card from my purse and set it on the counter between us. I'm leaving you, Morgan. Not today, maybe not tomorrow, but I'm leaving. And I'm taking the job Ethan offered me. Morgan's face contorted with rage. You're not taking any job. You're not going anywhere. If you try to leave me, I will destroy you financially. I will tie you up in court for years. I will make sure you get nothing in the divorce settlement. You'll be too old and too poor to start over. Then I'll start over with nothing, I said. It's better than staying here with you. I walked toward the stairs. Camila, Morgan called after me. When you come crawling back, and you don't expect me to take you back easily. I didn't respond. I went to our bedroom and started pulling clothes from my closet. My hands were still shaking, but this time from adrenaline instead of fear. For the first time in 25 years, I was choosing myself. And it felt like breathing after being underwater for too long. I packed a small suitcase with essentials. Not much, just enough for a few days. I'd figure out the rest later. The emerald ring went into my purse, still in its small wooden box. Ethan's business cards went in there too. As I carried my suitcase down the stairs, Morgan appeared in the hallway. You'll regret this, he said. The only thing I regret, I replied, is not leaving 20 years ago. I walked out the door of the house I'd lived in for 2 decades, got in my car with 200,000 miles and a check engine light, and drove to the Marriott downtown where I checked into a room with the credit card Morgan didn't know I had, the one I'd been secretly using to save small amounts for years just in case I ever found the courage to leave. Then I pulled out my phone and sent Ethan a text. I'm leaving him. I accept the job. Can we talk? His response came within 30 seconds. Where are you? I'm coming to you. I gave him the hotel address. 20 minutes later, there was a knock on my door. I opened it to find Ethan standing in the hallway, still in his jeans and leather jacket, slightly out of breath as if he'd run from his car. Hi, I said. Hi, he said back. Then I was in his arms, crying into his shoulder, and he was holding me like I was something precious he'd thought he'd lost forever. I've got you, he whispered. I've got you, Camila. You're safe now. And for the first time in 30 years, I believed that might actually be true. Ethan held me for a long time in that hotel room. I cried into his shoulder messy, ugly tears that soaked through his expensive cashmere sweater. Years of suppressed emotion pouring out all at once. He didn't try to stop me or tell me everything would be okay. He just held me and stroked my hair and let me break apart in his arms. When I finally pulled back, my face was blotchy and my eyes were swollen. Sorry, I said, gesturing at his sweater. I ruined your... I don't care about the sweater. He cupped my face in his hands, using his thumbs to wipe away the remaining tears. Tell me what happened. So I told him about the confrontation with Morgan, about the emails proving Morgan had sabotaged every investigation Ethan had conducted over the past 30 years. With each word, Ethan's expression grew darker. He admitted it, Ethan said quietly when I'd finished. He actually admitted to paying off private investigators for 3 decades. He thought he was protecting his investment. I laughed, but it sounded hollow. That's how he sees me, as property he bought and paid for. Ethan's jaw clenched. Did he hurt you when you confronted him? Not physically, just, I touched my arm where Morgan had grabbed me at the gala. The bruises were starting to fade to yellow-green. He's always been more subtle than that. Abuse doesn't have to be physical to be real, Ethan said. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a business card. This is Rebecca Martinez. She's the best divorce attorney in Colorado. She specializes in cases involving financial abuse and coercive control. I took the card with trembling hands. Ethan, I can't afford. I'm covering the legal fees, non-negotiable. He held up a hand when I started to protest. This isn't charity, Camila. This is me correcting a mistake I made 30 years ago when I let my father intimidate you. I should have fought harder for us then. I'm not making that mistake twice. But what if Morgan was right? The words came out small and afraid. What if you wake up one day and realize I'm not worth all this trouble? Ethan pulled me close again. I could feel his heart beating against my cheek. Listen to me, he said firmly. I have spent 30 years searching for you. I have dated other women, married, one of them built a billion-dollar company, traveled the world. None of it mattered because you weren't there. So no, I'm not going to wake up one day and realize you're not worth it. The only thing I'm going to realize is how lucky I am that I found you again. I looked up at him. We're not 22 anymore. No, he agreed. We're better than we were at 22. We know what we're fighting for now. He kissed me then, slowly, carefully, like I was something precious that might break. When we pulled apart, I was crying again, but this time they were different tears. These were the tears of someone who'd forgotten what it felt like to be cherished. The next morning, I called Rebecca Martinez. Her assistant scheduled me for an emergency consultation that afternoon. Apparently, when Ethan Blackwood called in a favor, people moved mountains. Rebecca's office was in a high-rise downtown, all glass and steel and modern furniture. She was in her early 40s, sharply dressed in a navy suit with intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing. Mrs. Sheffield, she said, shaking my hand. Ethan has told me a bit about your situation. Before we begin, I want you to know that everything you tell me is completely confidential. This is a safe space. I'd never had a safe space before. We talked for 2 hours. I told her about the monthly allowance, the isolation from friends and family, Morgan's control over every aspect of my life, about having to ask permission to buy groceries or see a doctor. Rebecca took notes on a yellow legal pad, her expression growing grimmer with each detail. Mrs. Sheffield, may I call you Camila? I nodded. Camila, what you're describing is a textbook case of financial abuse. Your husband has systematically isolated you and made you economically dependent. That gives us significant leverage in divorce proceedings. But I have no money, I said. How can I afford to... Colorado is an equitable distribution state, Rebecca interrupted. That means marital assets get divided fairly in a divorce. You've been married 25 years. You're entitled to a significant portion of everything acquired during the marriage. Morgan said he'd tie me up in court for years, that I'd get nothing. Rebecca smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. Morgan Sheffield is bluffing. Men like him rely on intimidation to maintain control. But I've handled dozens of cases like this. I know how to fight them. She flipped through her notes. Now Ethan mentioned he's offered you a position at Blackwood Industries, Director of Community Relations, but I haven't accepted yet. I wasn't sure if... Accept it, Rebecca said firmly. Employment history will strengthen your case. It shows you're capable of financial independence. And frankly, having your own income will make the divorce proceedings move faster. How fast are we talking? Colorado has a 91-day waiting period for divorces. But with Morgan's documented financial abuse and your willingness to settle equitably, we could have preliminary agreements in place within 6 months. Full dissolution by this time next year. A year. 1 more year and I'd be free. It felt both impossibly long and miraculously short. There's something else, Rebecca said, her expression shifting. Ethan mentioned that Morgan admitted to sabotaging private investigations. Do you have any documentation of that? I thought about the email Morgan had shown me on his phone. He showed me an email from 15 years ago, but I don't have access to it. We'll subpoena his email records during discovery. If he's been systematically interfering with someone else's legal right to locate you, that could open him up to additional civil liability. She made another note. Especially if Ethan wants to pursue a separate lawsuit. I don't want revenge, I said quickly. I just want out. Rebecca's expression softened. That's admirable, but sometimes justice and revenge overlap. Let's focus on getting you safely out of this marriage first. Everything else can wait. She walked me through the next steps. Filing for legal separation, opening my own bank account, establishing residency separate from Morgan. It was overwhelming and terrifying and exhilarating all at once. When I left her office 2 hours later, I had a folder full of documents to sign and a court date for a temporary restraining order if Morgan became threatening. I also had something I hadn't felt in 25 years' hope. 1 week later, I started work at Blackwood Industries. Rebecca, my assistant, gave me a tour of the offices on my first day. The building was all modern glass and steel with views of the Rocky Mountains from every window. This is your office, Rebecca said, opening a door on the 14th floor. The space was beautiful. Floor-to-ceiling windows, a mahogany desk, bookshelves waiting to be filled, a small sitting area for meetings. On the desk was a vase of white roses and a handwritten note. Welcome to Blackwood Industries. I'm so proud of you. I touched the petals gently, blinking back tears. Mr. Blackwood asked me to give you this as well, Rebecca said, handing me a laptop and a phone. Company devices. Your email is already set up and IT has you scheduled for training this afternoon. Thank you, I managed. She smiled. I'll let you get settled. Staff meeting is at 10 in the conference room. Mr. Blackwood will be there to introduce you to the team. After she left, I sat in my new office chair and looked out at the mountains. 1 week ago, I'd been standing in Morgan's kitchen listening to him explain how he'd destroyed 30 years of my life. Now I was sitting in my own office with my own desk about to start a job that paid more than I'd ever imagined earning. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. How's your first day? Want to grab lunch later? It's perfect, I typed back. Lunch sounds wonderful. I set the phone down and allowed myself to smile. For the first time in decades, I was building something that belonged to me. The staff meeting was intimidating. 15 people sat around a massive conference table. They were all younger than me, sharply dressed, clearly brilliant at their jobs. I felt like an imposter in my discount store suit. Ethan stood at the head of the table, radiating quiet authority in his perfectly tailored charcoal suit. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Camilla Sheffield, our new Director of Community Relations. He smiled at me warmly. Camilla has extensive experience in education and literacy programs. She'll be spearheading our partnership with Denver Public Schools to expand reading initiatives in underserved communities. The team applauded politely. A young woman in her 30s raised her hand. Welcome, Camilla. I'm Jennifer Park, Head of Public Relations. I'm excited to work with you on the school partnerships. Others introduced themselves. Marketing Director, Development Coordinator, Communications Manager. They were all kind and professional, and didn't seem to notice or care that I was a 57-year-old woman who hadn't worked in a professional environment in 15 years. After the meeting, Ethan caught my elbow gently. "Walk with me," he asked. We took the elevator down to the lobby, then stepped outside into the crisp October morning. "How are you really doing?" Ethan asked once we were alone. "Terrified," I admitted. "Everyone on your team is so young and capable, and you're worried you don't belong." He took my hand as we walked. "Camila, I offered you this job because you're perfect for it. Not because I'm trying to rescue you or take care of you, because you have a master's degree in education and 10 years of experience running literacy programs at the library. Morgan made me quit that job." "Morgan was an idiot," Ethan said bluntly. "You're brilliant and you care about helping kids learn to read. That's exactly what we need for this program." We walked in silence for a moment, just enjoying the cool air and the mountain views. "I got served divorce papers yesterday," I said quietly. "Rebecca filed for legal separation. Morgan has 30 days to respond." Ethan's hand tightened on mine. "How do you feel about that?" "Relieved, scared, free," I laughed. "All of the above." "That's normal," he said. "Ending a 25-year marriage is major even when it's the right decision." "Are we moving too fast?" The question had been nagging at me for days. With the job with us spending time together, Morgan's lawyers could use our relationship against me in the divorce. Ethan stopped walking and turned to face me. "Rebecca and I discussed this," he said carefully. "As long as we're not cohabiting and we're discreet, your relationship with me shouldn't impact the divorce proceedings. Colorado is a no-fault divorce state. Morgan can't prevent the divorce just because you're seeing someone else." "But it looks bad. His wife leaving him for her boss." "His wife leaving him for the man she loved 30 years ago," Ethan corrected. "The man her husband deliberately kept from finding her. If anything, Morgan's interference could work in your favor." He cupped my face in his hands. "But if you want to slow down, if you need space to process everything that's happening, I'll understand. We have time now. That's the difference between being 22 and being 57. We can do this right." I looked up at this man who'd searched for me for 3 decades, who'd offered me a job and financial independence, and asked for nothing in return except the chance to get to know me again. "I don't want to slow down," I said. "I've spent 25 years moving at Morgan's pace, making decisions based on his comfort level. For once, I want to choose what I want." "And what do you want?" "This," I said simply. "The job, the friendship, the possibility of us. All of it. Even if it's scary." Ethan kissed me right there on the sidewalk in front of the glass windows of Blackwood Industries where anyone could see. When we broke apart, I was smiling. "Come on," he said, taking my hand again. "Let's get lunch. There's a great Thai place around the corner, and you need to tell me your ideas for the school literacy program." 3 weeks into my new job, I got a call from Rebecca Martinez. "We need to meet," she said, her voice tight with barely contained excitement. "Today, if possible. There's been a development in your case." I drove to her office immediately. Rebecca was waiting with a thick folder of documents spread across her conference table. "Sit down," she said. "This is going to take a while." I sat. As part of divorce discovery, we subpoenaed Morgan's business records, financial statements, tax returns, corporate documents, standard procedure. She paused for effect. What we found was not standard. She pushed a document across the table toward me. I recognized it as some kind of insurance claim form, but the details were dense and confusing. "What am I looking at? Evidence of systematic insurance fraud," Rebecca said. "Morgan's development company has been filing inflated claims on construction projects for at least 15 years, claiming damages that never occurred, billing for materials that were never purchased, collecting insurance payouts and pocketing the difference." My stomach dropped. "He's been stealing—" "Worse than that. He's been using the fraudulent payouts to cover operating costs for his legitimate projects, essentially creating a shell game where insurance companies fund his real estate developments without knowing it." She pulled out another document. "This is particularly damaging. 3 years ago, Morgan filed a claim for fire damage on a property in Boulder, claimed $200,000 in losses. We have evidence the fire never happened. How much are we talking about in total? Conservatively, $3 to $5 million over 15 years. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. "Camila, this is serious. This isn't just civil fraud. This is criminal. The State Insurance Commission is going to want to know about this. I felt like the room was spinning. 25 years of marriage, and I'd had no idea Morgan was a criminal. Am I implicated? The thought terrified me. We filed joint tax returns. Could I be charged too? Unlikely, Rebecca said. We can demonstrate you had no knowledge of or access to Morgan's business dealings. Your name isn't on any of the shell companies he used for the fraud, and the fact that he controlled your finances so completely actually helps your case here. You can't be complicit in something you had no knowledge of. She gathered the documents back into a pile. Here's what's going to happen. I'm legally obligated to report this to the authorities. The Colorado Division of Insurance will launch an investigation. Morgan will likely face criminal charges. How long until? Hard to say. These investigations can take months. But Camilla, this changes everything for your divorce. When Morgan's assets get frozen pending the fraud investigation, he won't have the resources to drag out your divorce proceedings. You'll be free much sooner than we anticipated. I should have felt relieved. Instead, I felt sick. I married a criminal, I said quietly. I spent 25 years living in a house paid for with stolen money. Rebecca's expression softened. You married a man who lied to you about who he was. That's not your fault. And you're doing the right thing by leaving. I drove back to my hotel room. I'd been living at the Marriott for 3 weeks now, and called Ethan. Can you come over? I asked. I need to talk to you about something. He arrived 20 minutes later with Thai takeout and 2 bottles of sparkling water. I told him everything Rebecca had discovered. Ethan listened without interrupting, his expression growing progressively darker. Jesus Christ, he said when I'd finished. 3 to 5 million in insurance fraud. I had no idea, I said. All those years I thought he was just bad at business. I never imagined. Of course you didn't. Ethan took my hand. You're not a criminal, Camilla. You're a victim of his deception, just like the insurance companies were. But I benefited from it. The house, the money, everything was lies built on top of more lies. He pulled me close. This isn't your fault. You didn't ask for any of this. I rested my head on his shoulder. What happens now? Now you focus on your job and building your new life. Let Rebecca and the authorities handle Morgan. That's not your responsibility anymore. It feels like it should be. It's not, Ethan said firmly. Your only responsibility now is to yourself. We ate Thai food and watched old movies on the hotel TV. Ethan left around 10, kissing me goodnight at the door, like we were teenagers on a first date. Alone in my hotel room, I pulled out the emerald ring and looked at it under the lamplight. 30 years ago, Ethan had given me this ring and promised to spend forever making me happy. I'd walked away from that promise because I was terrified and pregnant and convinced that love wasn't enough to build a future on. Now I was 57 years old, living in a hotel room, watching my second marriage implode in a scandal of fraud and lies. But I also had a job I loved, financial independence for the first time in my adult life, and a man who'd spent 3 decades searching for me because he'd never stopped believing we belonged together. Maybe love wasn't enough on its own, but maybe love combined with wisdom, independence, and the courage to choose yourself first was enough to build something real. 2 months after I left Morgan, he was arrested. The Colorado Division of Insurance had moved faster than anyone expected. They'd found even more evidence of fraud than Rebecca's preliminary investigation had uncovered. $6 million over 17 years. Multiple shell companies, falsified documents, a pattern of systematic deception that the prosecutors called one of the most extensive insurance fraud schemes in state history. I watched the news coverage from my new apartment, a modest 1-bedroom I'd rented with my first paycheck from Blackwood Industries. Morgan looked small in his expensive suit, being led out of his office in handcuffs. I should have felt vindicated, or angry, or something. Instead, I just felt sad. Sad for the wasted years. Sad for the man he'd become. Sad for the life we could have had if he'd been honest about who he was. My phone rang. Ethan. I saw the news, he said. Are you okay? I don't know, I admitted. It's strange watching your husband get arrested on television. Ex-husband, Ethan corrected gently. The divorce was finalized yesterday. Rebecca's courier should be delivering the papers this afternoon. My heart skipped. It's final. It's final. Morgan waived his right to contest when he got arrested. His lawyers advised him to focus on the criminal defense. Ethan paused. You're free, Camilla. Free. I sat down on my second-hand couch and let that word sink in. After 25 years of marriage, I was free. How do you feel? Ethan asked. Like I can breathe for the first time in decades, I said honestly. Good, because I have a question for you. My pulse quickened. What kind of question? The kind that requires an in-person answer. Can I take you to dinner tonight? Dinner. A real date, Ethan said. Not coffee in a cafe or lunch between meetings. A proper dinner where I pick you up and take you somewhere nice and we pretend we're not two people in our late 50s with complicated pasts. I laughed. That sounds perfect. 7 o'clock. I'll be ready. Ethan picked me up in his BMW at exactly 7 o'clock. He was wearing dark slacks and a navy sweater that made his eyes look almost black. He'd shaved and combed his silver-streaked hair back from his face. He looked distinguished and handsome, and nothing like the college student I'd fallen in love with 30 years ago. He looked better. You look beautiful, he said when I opened the door. I'd worn the emerald dress from the gala, the one that had started everything. Thank you, I said. Where are we going? You'll see. He drove us up into the foothills along winding roads I'd driven countless times in college. The sun was setting over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and purple. Finally, he pulled into a parking lot I recognized. The campus lake, I said, my voice catching. Our spot, Ethan confirmed. He'd arranged a picnic on the grass beside the water. String lights hung between the trees. A blanket spread out with wine and cheese and the kind of simple food we used to share when we were students. Ethan, I whispered. This is 30 years overdue, he finished. We sat on the blanket and watched the sun disappear behind the mountains. I have something for you, Ethan said, reaching into his pocket. He pulled out a small velvet box. My heart stopped. Before you panic, he said quickly. This isn't a proposal. I know we need more time. We need to relearn each other as the people we are now, not the people we were. He opened the box. Inside was his grandmother's emerald ring, the same ring I'd kept hidden in my jewelry box for 30 years. I want you to have this again, Ethan said. Not as an engagement ring, not yet, but as a promise that this time I'm not letting anyone or anything come between us. No more lies, no more manipulation, just us figuring this out together. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I still have my ring, I said. The one you gave me 30 years ago. I kept it all this time. Ethan's eyes widened. You kept it? I couldn't let it go. It was all I had left of us. I pulled the small velvet box from my purse. I'd started carrying it with me everywhere since leaving Morgan. We sat there on our college picnic blanket, both of us holding rings that represented promises made and broken, and maybe finally ready to be made again. I love you, Ethan said. I loved you when we were 22 and stupid. I loved you when we were apart for 30 years, and I love you now with all your scars and all your strength. I love you too, I said. I never stopped, even when I thought I had. He leaned across the blanket and kissed me. The mountains witnessed it. The same mountains that had stood here for millions of years and would stand here for millions more. Some things were permanent. Some things were worth waiting for. Some things were worth fighting for, even if it took 30 years to realize it. 6 months later, I stood in front of a mirror in my small apartment, adjusting the simple cream-colored dress I'd chosen for today. It wasn't a wedding dress. Not technically. Just an elegant knee-length dress that I'd bought with my own money from my own salary. That fact mattered more than the dress itself. Behind me, Jennifer Park from work was fastening a string of pearls around my neck. Borrowed from my mother, she said, smiling at me in the mirror. Old, new, borrowed blue. We need to cover all the bases. I'm not superstitious, I said, but I was smiling too. Humor me. This is the most romantic thing I've ever witnessed, and I'm living vicariously through you. There was a knock on the door. Rebecca Martinez peeked her head in. Ready? She asked. Ethan's getting antsy. He's been ready for 30 years, apparently, and waiting another 10 minutes might kill him. I laughed. I'm ready. We were getting married in the backyard of Rebecca Martinez's house. Just 30 people. Close friends, my parents who'd driven in from Kansas, Ethan's sister from Boston. No grand ballroom. No 300 guests. No pretense. Just the people who mattered witnessing two people who'd found their way back to each other after 3 decades of separation. I walked out into the garden. Ethan stood under an arch decorated with white roses and greenery, wearing a charcoal suit and the most radiant smile I'd ever seen. His eyes filled with tears when he saw me. There was no aisle, just a path through the grass, but I walked it with my head held high, no one giving me away because I was already my own person, choosing this freely. When I reached Ethan, he took both my hands in his. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," I whispered back. The officiant, a friend of Ethan's from college, cleared his throat. "We're gathered here today to celebrate something pretty extraordinary," he began. "Not just a wedding, but a love story that refused to die. 30 years is a long time to wait for someone. But Ethan and Camilla prove that some things are worth the wait." He looked at us. "I believe you both wrote your own vows." Ethan went first. "Camilla," he said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face, "I can't promise we'll recapture what we had at 22. We're different people now. We've been shaped by loss and mistakes and years of living separate lives, but I can promise to love who you are now, not who you were then. I can promise to support your independence, not try to control it. And I can promise that for whatever years we have left, I will wake up every morning grateful that I found you again." Now it was my turn. My hands shook as I read from the small card where I'd written my vows. "Ethan, I promise I'll never again choose safety over truth. I'll never again let fear make my decisions. And I promise to be brave enough to let you see all of me, the broken parts and the healed parts, and the parts still healing. You spent 30 years searching for me. I promise to spend the rest of my life being worth the search." The officiant smiled. "By the power vested in me by the state of Colorado, I now pronounce you husband and wife. Ethan, you may kiss your bride." Ethan pulled me close and kissed me. Our friends cheered. Someone popped champagne. And I realized that this small ceremony in a friend's backyard with people who loved us for who we really were was worth more than any grand society wedding could ever be. Because it was real. Because it was chosen. Because at 58 years old, I'd finally learned the difference between settling and choosing. The reception was simple. Catered food, a Bluetooth speaker playing our favorite songs, lawn chairs set up in circles so people could talk and laugh. My parents cornered me near the dessert table. "You look happy, sweetheart," my mother said, tears in her eyes. "Really genuinely happy. I haven't seen you look like this in 30 years." "I am happy," I said. For the first time in a very long time. My father hugged me. "I never liked Morgan," he admitted. "But you seemed to want that life, so I kept my mouth shut. I'm glad you found your way back to Ethan. He's a good man." Around sunset, Ethan and I slipped away from the party. We drove up into the foothills back to the campus lake where he'd proposed the first time and where we'd had our first real date after reuniting. We sat on the hood of his car watching the mountains turn purple in the fading light. "Mrs. Blackwood," Ethan said, testing out my new name. "I'm keeping Sheffield professionally," I said. "The literacy program knows me as Camilla Sheffield. I don't want to confuse the schools." "Fair enough. Mrs. Sheffield Blackwood." I laughed. "That's a mouthful. How about just Camilla?" "Just Camilla works for me." He pulled me close. "Did I mention you're amazing? You've built an incredible literacy program in 6 months. The Denver school system is talking about expanding it to 10 more schools next year." "It's good work," I said. "Important work. I love it." "I love watching you do it," Ethan said. "Watching you come into your own. Watching you realize how capable you are." We sat in comfortable silence for a while. "What are you thinking?" Ethan asked eventually. "That I'm 58 years old and my life is just beginning," I said. "Is that strange?" "Not at all. 58 isn't too late for new beginnings. We have years ahead of us. Decades if we're lucky." "What do you want to do with those decades?" Ethan considered. "Travel. I want to take you to all the places we talked about visiting when we were in college. Italy, Greece, Japan. I want to see the world with you." "I'd like that," I said. "And I want to wake up every morning next to you. Make you coffee. Listen to you talk about your work. Grow old with you properly this time without all the lies and manipulation." "That sounds perfect." He turned to face me. "Any regrets?" I thought about the question seriously. "I regret the 30 years we lost," I said. "I regret not being brave enough to fight for us when we were young. I regret settling for Morgan out of fear instead of waiting for something real." "But," Ethan prompted, hearing the unspoken word, But I don't know if I would appreciate this as much if I hadn't lost it first, I admitted. Maybe we needed those 30 years to become people who could actually sustain this. Maybe we needed to fail at other relationships to understand what real love looks like. That's very philosophical of you. I had a lot of time to think over the past few months. I smiled. Between the divorce and starting a new job and falling in love again, I've had plenty of time for reflection. Ethan kissed my forehead. I'm glad the universe gave us a second chance, even if it took 3 decades. We drove back to the reception as the stars came out. Our friends were dancing in Rebecca's backyard string lights twinkling overhead. Jennifer grabbed my hand and pulled me onto the makeshift dance floor. Come on, Mrs. Blackwood. You're not allowed to sit out your own wedding. I danced with my colleagues, my parents' Ethan's sister, and then Ethan pulled me close for a slow dance under the stars. Happy? He asked. Deliriously, I said. Good, because I plan to keep you this happy for the next 30 years at minimum. Only 30, I'm planning conservatively. Don't want to overpromise. I laughed and rested my head on his shoulder. Around us, our friends celebrated. The mountains stood silent and eternal in the distance. The stars wheeled overhead. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt completely at peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had chosen this. Every part of it. The job, the apartment, the divorce, the new beginning, and most importantly, the man I was dancing with under the Colorado stars. Some love stories don't end with the first I do. Sometimes they're just beginning. 3 years later, I sat in my office at Blackwood Industries reviewing applications for our expanded literacy program. We were now in 35 Denver schools. We'd helped over 2,000 kids improve their reading levels, and next month we were launching in Colorado Springs. My phone buzzed. A text from Ethan. Dinner tonight, I'm cooking. You can't cook, I texted back. I'm learning. YouTube is very educational. Come home by 6. See you then? Home. We'd bought a house together in the foothills. Nothing ostentatious. Just a comfortable 3-bedroom with mountain views and a garden where I could grow vegetables. It was ours. Jointly owned. Jointly chosen. Every morning I woke up in that house and still felt a little surprised that this was my life. There was a knock on my office door. Jennifer poked her head in. Camilla, there's someone here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment, but she says it's important. Who is it? Emily Rodriguez. She was in our first literacy cohort 3 years ago. I remembered Emily, 9 years old, reading at a first-grade level, struggling in every subject. Send her in. A young woman entered my office. She was 12 now, taller and more confident than the shy 3rd grader I remembered. Mrs. Blackwood, she said, I wanted to show you something. She pulled a paper from her backpack, a report card, straight A's. I'm reading at grade level now, Emily said, beaming. Actually above grade level. My teacher says I might qualify for the gifted program next year. My eyes filled with tears. Emily, that's incredible. It's because of you, she said simply. Because of the reading program. You didn't give up on me when everyone else did. After she left, I sat at my desk and cried. Not sad tears, happy tears. Tears of someone who'd finally found her purpose. I'd spent 25 years of my life being told I was worthless, that I had nothing valuable to contribute, that my only value was in being quiet and compliant and not causing trouble. It had taken 58 years, but I'd finally proven Morgan wrong. I was valuable. I was capable. I was making a difference. And I was loved by a man who saw all of that and valued it. That evening I drove home to our house in the foothills. Ethan was indeed attempting to cook. The kitchen was a disaster zone of pots and pans and what appeared to be the remnants of attempted pasta. I'm ordering pizza, he announced when he saw me. Good plan, I agreed, laughing. We ate pizza on our back deck, watching the sun set over the mountains. How was work? Ethan asked. I told him about Emily, about the progress we were seeing in the literacy program, about the potential expansion to 3 more cities. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions, offering suggestions. Not because he was my boss, but because he was my partner. I'm proud of you, he said when I'd finished. You've built something incredible. We built it together, I corrected. You funded the program. You gave me the platform. I gave you the opportunity, Ethan said. You did everything else. That's all you, Camilla. Later that night, we lay in bed together, the windows open to let in the cool mountain air. Do you ever think about what our lives would have been like if we'd gotten married at 22? I asked. Sometimes, Ethan admitted. But I don't think it would have worked. We were too young, too idealistic. We would have struggled, resented each other when things got hard, maybe even divorced. You think we needed to fail first. I think we needed to become ourselves first, he said. You needed to learn your own strength. I needed to build something without my father's approval. We needed to understand what we were fighting for. He pulled me closer. 30 years is a long time to wait for someone, but I'd wait another 30 if it meant ending up here with you. I thought about the girl I'd been at 22, scared and pregnant and convinced that walking away was the only way to protect the people she loved. I thought about the woman I'd become at 50, trapped in a marriage built on lies, convinced she deserved nothing better. And I thought about who I was now at 61. Independent, purposeful, loved not despite my flaws, but because of my wholeness. I wouldn't change anything, I said. All of it, the pain, the mistakes, the lost years, it brought us here. And here is perfect. Ethan kissed me softly. Here is perfect, he agreed. Outside our window, the mountains stood eternal and unchanging. But inside our home, everything had changed. And I'd finally learned what I should have known at 22. Love isn't about being rescued. It's about being seen. It's not about safety. It's about truth. And it's never ever too late to choose yourself first and build a life worth living.